In this video, we are going to discuss Aristotle's ideas on governments and his classification of government, mainly. And we know that Aristotle analyzed and compared 158 constitutions, of course, with the help of his students. By doing this, he united the empirical and speculative modes of inquiry, both normative and empirical dimensions of any kind of inquiry. Aristotle built on Plato's classification of constitutions. In the Statesman, we remember that Plato wrote the Statesman, and Aristotle built on that classification of constitutions by taking into account the ends of a constitution and the number who wielded political power. So there were two things he took into account: the ends of a constitution and the number who wielded political power. Constitutions which promoted general well-being of the governed were found to be true or good by Aristotle, whereas those that restricted the interests of the ruled were found to be bad or perverted. So Aristotle is classifying governments into two main categories of true and perverted forms. Now, for him, a government ruled by one, few, or many in the general interest of the community was monarchy, aristocracy, and polity, respectively. Conversely, a government ruled by one, few, or many in the self-interest of the ruler was tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy, respectively. So we have got two types of governments, by one, few, or many, and these are based on the criterions of general interest of the community and interest of one, few, or many for their own purposes. In each of these true and perverted constitutions, the system of distributive justice was defined in a particular way befitting the constitution. Aristotle regarded monarchy as a true form of government. It's not a surprise, because for him, the argument was that it was possible to have a virtuous person as a ruler who would be able to stand outside the law and be its single guardian. However, he had a problem, and that problem he highlighted that in the form of skeptical thinking, that it would be very difficult to find a virtuous person who could be a monarch. Even if we are able to find, he had a condition on his rule. And he argues that public interest, even in a monarchy, was best secured through a system of rules framed by a legislator who would also be the founder of the city. Now, he is making a differentiation, or he is differentiating 5 types of kingship. The first he found in the Spartan model, where the kings were responsible for military and religious matters. The second was a mixture of kingship and tyranny, which he found among the barbarians. The third category was of dictatorship, which existed in the early part of Greek history. Likewise, the fourth, according to Aristotle, was associated with the heroic age and was kingship, which was hereditary and ruled by law. This kind of kingship was initially wielding unlimited powers, but the king being a judge with powers to control religion, but eventually their powers got circumscribed. The last one in this category of kingship was absolute kingship, or rule by one person who controlled everything. For Aristotle, monarchy developed into an aristocracy, which was a true form of law. Or to say it differently, which was a true form of rule by a few. There were three kinds of aristocracy, all of which were mixed constitutions, employing, and apart from virtue, they were employing other principles. So the first kind, which you saw in Carthage, combined virtue with wealth and number. The second, found in Sparta, combined virtue with the democratic principle of freedom. The third one combined wealth with freedom and was more oligarchic in nature. Now, the third form of true government was polity for him. So, first one is monarchy, then aristocracy, and then polity. These are two forms of governments for him. Polity is a kind of mixed rule, in which the claims of the many and their property were held in check by law. Now, after dealing with these two forms of government, Aristotle comes to the perverted forms of government. As far as these forms of government were concerned, tyranny was defined as the arbitrary power of an individual who was responsible to no one. He was governing all alike, whether equals or better, and governing for what? For one's own advantage and not for everyone's gain, not of its subjects' interest. Therefore, it was against their will, and it was a perfect counterpart of monarchy. Now, tyranny degenerates into an oligarchy with the interest of the few, the rich being the sole concern. Aristotle is describing four types of oligarchy here. The first was a moderate one, close to a polity, where the rulers ruled in accordance with law. Access to office was based on property, and it was restricted. For higher offices, Aristotle is recommending a large share and a smaller one for low but essential offices. The second one was more exclusive. It was the rich and the few who would be enjoying the benefits. Under the third category, there were more restrictions, and it was narrow in scope. It was based on a hereditary governing elite. The fourth one was constituted by a small rich coterie which ruled without laws. Now, the third and the least bad of perverted forms of government was democracy. And for Aristotle, democracy was the rule by the poor and the majority. This was for him because, and he is arguing that when they meet together, they may very likely be better than the few good. It is regarded not individually, but collectively. Like when a feast is given by many, it is better than a dinner given by one, because a feast includes many people's contribution. So it comes out to be a better result. The many contrary to one, or the expert was a better judge of policies for Aristotle. And the worst form of perverted government was tyranny. Aristotle contended that there was a difference between democracy and polity, between rule by the best, that is aristocracy, and rule by the richest, that is oligarchy. The difference between a monarchy and a tyranny was an ethical one. Monarchy was better than an aristocracy, which in turn was better than polity. And tyranny was worse than an oligarchy, and oligarchy was worse than a democracy. So Aristotle is providing a qualified support for democracy here. For Aristotle, actual governments were bad, but democratic government tended to be the best. Here again, he is describing four kinds of democracy. And these four kinds are based on progressive scale. It follows a progression from a moderate democracy to an extreme one. Moderate democracy had some sort of property qualifications for officials, with a majority of people being agricultural and unmindful of political offices. According to Aristotle, the second type was similar to the first one, but there was an exception that there wasn't any property qualification for officials. And this type of democracy granted everyone the right to hold office as long as they were not disqualified by birth. So there was a right to birth. For certain offices, if you are born in a particular category, then this right to birth will be transformed into a right to hold that office. If you could claim that right to be born in a particular group, then it makes it clear that you will be part of this kind of system. Now, under this government, there would be no payment for performance of public duties. Government was governed in accordance with law. In the third kind of government, citizenship qualifications were relaxed to include all free men. Citizenship was not restrictive. There wasn't any criteria of birth or property. It was open to all. And it included aliens and children of emancipated slaves. We need to remember that Aristotle favored slavery. But here he is including in this form of government slaves' entitlement to be part of the democracy. These slaves were excluded from the first two types of slaves. These are free from slavery. Now they are liberated. In an extreme democracy, all restraints were removed. It was totally lawless, with full rights were given to demagogues. We need to remember that Plato classified governments on the basis of their law-bindingness, while Aristotle is using the criteria of general welfare and the number who wielded political power. For Aristotle, there can be two distinct claims to power. One based upon the rights of property, and the other upon the welfare of the greater number of human beings. Aristotle is coming to ideal types. For him, monarchy is the thing on which we need to concentrate, rather than aristocracy. He argues that monarchy would be the best form if a wise and a virtuous king could be found. But he wasn't sure whether to grant anybody the absolute right to rule or not. When it comes to actual states, he was clearly making a distinction between the ethical and the political. He was placing great importance on the Constitution as an agreement of offices. He's also making distinction between law and the political structure of an organized government. He separated the political from the economic and social structure. So these are the ideas of Aristotle on various types of governments and his idea on best practicable state. So this analysis enabled him to consider the form of government that would be suitable to a large number of states, assuming that for its realization no more virtue or political skill was needed than what the states could gather. Though not an ideal, it was the best practicable state, and we know that he called this as polity. It was in accordance with his principle of the golden mean. It obviates the extreme tendencies within oligarchic and democratic systems. He called it as polity or constitutional government, the name he gave to moderate democracy in Book Third of his Politics. Now, Aristotle is making a distinction between a democracy and an oligarchy by referring to them as majority and minority rule. Democracy was a constitution with a majority government, with the free-born and poor controlled. In an oligarchy, government was controlled by a minority. And who were in this minority? The rich and the better born. Democracy did not exclude the rich or wealth. As Aristotle made it clear, oligarchy usually imposes qualifications for voting and holding office. Now, what is polity? While talking about polity, Aristotle is accepting the presence of a wealthy class and relatively poor citizens as inevitable. The inevitability of the presence of these two classes is born from the viewpoint of political stability. For him, it was necessary to enlarge a group that was neither rich nor poor. Namely, it was what? The middle class. The rich enjoyed great benefits and privileges, but were unwilling to accept discipline. Whereas the poor, because of their deprivation, lacked spirit and enthusiasm. Therefore, the middle class is best suitable to constitute the mean in the social structure. It not only balances the oligarchic and democratic elements, but also it mixes them in the right proportion as to ensure stability. The middle class was a countervailing force. It neutralized the centrifugal tendencies generated by contending forces, and which, if are not checked, then would lead to the demise of the city. So, for him, the larger the middle class, the greater the possibility of tranquility and stability in the state. Because middle class for him is straight up middle path between the insolence of the rich and the unruly behavior of the poor. So this was his idea of middle class rule, which he called polity, and he paid attention to the presence of both rich and poor people. Now, the combination between rich and the poor was necessary. Why? Because both these practices were extreme. So, It was important to find a mean where the poor were given a moderate pay while the rich were fined at the same time. For him, a stable society had to balance forces of quality and quantity. And quality referred for him to what? To an exclusive category of birth, wealth, property, social position, or education. While quantity meant numbers, the claims of the mass of people, or political participation. So this is the way Aristotle is describing polity, and why he is preferring this polity is made clear here. Furthermore, he saw this. Apart from all these things, what Aristotle saw, he saw, what did he find? He found in rule by the middle class, two important political ideas were fulfilled. He found that middle class is fulfilling two important ideas: equality and consensus. So it will be a bulwark against selfishness, tyranny, unlawfulness, and instability. Since any state for Aristotle was better than an anarchy, and that's why he preferred a mixed state to a pure one more, for that was more enduring. A polity for him took into account freedom, wealth, culture, noble birth, and numerical superiority. How Popper is viewing this? Karl Popper, viewed Aristotle's best state as a compromise between three things: a romantic Platonic aristocracy, a sound and balanced feudalism, and some democratic ideas. But he found feudalism as the best of it. So these are the ideas of Aristotle on various types of governments and his idea on best practicable state.